بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم اللهم ألهمنا رشدنا وعذنا من شرور أنفسنا. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make this a gathering where the angels are present, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala purify our souls and purify our intentions and make us from those who hear the word and who benefit. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us a pure intention where we all intend to lift ignorance from ourselves and from others, and to teach others and to teach ourselves, and to remind others and to remind ourselves. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive us and help us to not be from those who don't act upon what they know. So alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, this series that we have together is entitled Leading a Pure Life. And the idea is to focus on practical guidance that we can all follow, and with particular emphasis on Imam al-Ghazali's Ihya. So we started last week, or last month rather, with the prohibitions of the tongue. And I think if people can maybe come closer, it would be nice, because when I look straight forward, I feel like I'm alone. Inshallah, jazakallah khair, barakallahu feekum. And when we were discussing Imam Ghazali's Ihya and his particular section on the prohibitions of the tongue, just to recap, first he spoke about the dangers of speaking and how when you're quiet you're safe. But if you have to speak, you have to know the rules for speaking. And then he said that the first danger is speaking about things that don't matter, speaking about things that don't concern you, and the danger of that, and extra speech. And then he spoke about speaking about things that are false and that are haram, and the danger of that. And then he spoke about arguing and showing off, and the harms in arguing, the harm that it has to your heart, and the harm that it has to others and to relationships, and how the Prophet ﷺ promised a home in paradise for the one who leaves arguing. Regardless of whether they're right or wrong, if you leave arguing, you will have a home in paradise. And then he talked about fighting with others in a way where you argue in order to, with an ill intent, to harm that person or to show that person's ignorance or something like that, and that's even worse. And then he spoke about using showy language and showing off when speaking, either using overly flowery language or overly rhyming language and things like that, and that's particularly relevant to people who give speeches, that it's not something that is considered a good thing. And then he spoke about al-fuhsh was-sab, that speaking in a vulgar manner, using vulgar words, cursing, and that this wasn't from the way of the Prophet ﷺ, and that it's not from the way of the believers, that they use vulgar language and direct language to speak about things that are typically hidden, and to speak in that way. And then finally was al-la'n, or cursing, and cursing being that you invoke that the hellfire of Allah, or that you invoke that a person is removed from the mercy of Allah, and that this is something, a very bad thing to do, and to the extent that cursing a believer is like killing them, and that when a person in the time of the Prophet ﷺ cursed a camel, that the Prophet ﷺ commanded that camel be left alone, not be ridden at all, and be left alone completely because that camel is cursed. So that's basically a quick recap on what we did last time. And inshallah, we want to continue in the series of dangers or prohibitions of the tongue, or areas where the tongue can make mistakes. So the next section, Imam Ghazali talks about al-ghina wa shi'r. He talks about singing, music, and poetry. And Imam Ghazali has a whole section on this issue of singing and music in his book. And in that, he begins by saying, and if I were to summarize what he said, and if we need to get into more, inshallah, discussion in the Q&A, we can do that. But basically, he says that all of the madhahib of fiqh, in general, they allow poetry, even if that poetry is being sung in a beautiful, melodious voice. So that's allowed. And also, generally, they allow the deaf or the drum, the hand drum, even if it has little jingly things on it, but that's generally allowed because we have a hadith that show that that's allowed. Where they differ is in other types of musical instruments. Imam Ghazali says, because of the hadith that states that the people will come who will make halal, zina and alcohol and silk and musical instruments. So because of that, the majority of the scholars say that musical instruments, aside from the drum, are not allowed. While there is a minority that say it's allowed if it's not leading to harm or not calling to evil. Because Imam Ghazali explains that the context of that hadith is in the context of the prohibition of alcohol. And that when people would drink, they would typically, there would be these other bad things associated with the drinking, be it wearing silk, committing, zina, and the musical instruments as well. And so when he says that when alcohol was prohibited, it was prohibited along with all of the other things that surround that lifestyle. And so that's what he mentions. So Imam Ghazali then says that when you look at, if you were to talk about singing as a general thing, there's nothing wrong with a beautiful voice, and this is from the Prophet ﷺ praised some people because they had a beautiful voice, and this is one of the blessings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us, and we have beautiful sounds that we experience all around the world. So he says that the problem is not in the beautiful voice or beautiful sound, but the issue is in something leading to harm, and in if there's a hadith, clear hadith that's prohibiting something, then violating the hadith. So he talks about some of the things that one needs to be careful of. He says that if the singing is leading to and has that message that is haram, calling to alcohol, calling to zina, calling to these kinds of things, then scholars have no difference of opinion that this is not allowed. And much of the music, the popular music, falls under this category, regardless of the classical fiqh debate. But scholars don't disagree that if something's calling to haram, then it's not allowed to listen to it, just like it's not allowed to sing it. And then they say that if a person is young, for example, and this music is going to, even if it's not calling to haram, but it might affect them in a negative way and cause them to do something haram, then also it wouldn't be allowed. And then they say that if it's involved, has something else that is haram involved with it, like mixing of the genders in a way that's not allowed, or listening to women's voice in a way that will arouse the desires. And Imam Ghazali mentions that the idea of listening to women, and he says that it's not necessarily prohibited in and of itself, but it is if it moves the desires that causes it to be prohibited. And he said that in that case it wouldn't differ if a person if they knew that if they talk to a particular woman, that will ignite their desires, then whether they're speaking, whether that woman is singing, or whether that woman is talking, or whether that woman is reading Quran, it wouldn't be allowed to listen to her, because you shouldn't do something that will move your desires in that way. So that's what he says, rahimahullah, about that, about the effect. And he also says that if a person is listening to even nasheeds, halal nasheeds and things like that, or na'at, or praise of Islamic songs. And even if that's allowed, if the person makes that their habit, that that's all they do all the time, they don't make dhikr, they don't read Quran, all they do is just listen, and they say, I'm listening to things that are halal, he says that also becomes problematic. And he says because, this is considered lahu, it's considered like a waste of time. And just like when you commit small sins and you do it all the time, it becomes a major sin. He says when you do lahu a lot, these things that are a waste of time, you do it a lot and you make it your habit and that's all you do, even if it's not haram, right? Then that will become like a small sin. And when you do a small sin a lot, it becomes a problem. So that's basically, what he says about music and singing. And particularly when he quotes, now in his section here about ghina, in this context, he quotes the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. First he says that poetry, right, aside from the music issue, but he says that, another thing that's important to note, that although the majority opinion, right, when it comes to musical instruments, the majority opinion as far as singing, that it's okay as long as the message is okay, it doesn't lead to haram. As far as musical instruments, that the deaf is allowed, but other instruments that are like, and some scholars have allowed the flute, but other instruments, especially guitars and wind and other types of wind instruments, typically the majority of scholars have said it's not allowed, but although some minority allow it. It's good to know that difference of opinion. Why is it good to know a difference of opinion? Because sometimes some people, especially when they become religious for the first time and they're still learning, they learn an opinion, or they may learn even that this is the majority opinion, or this is the strongest opinion, and then they are rude, or they're mean, or they're disrespectful to someone who may be following another opinion. So you may watch a TV show, an Islamic TV show or radio station, and it has music. Okay, so it's important to know the difference of opinion. Of course, it's not going to have the clearly haram music with a haram message, but it may have some instruments. So here, it's important to know that there are scholars who have allowed that in the past. And the rule is that, as Imam Sufyan al-Thawri said, one of the scholars of the Tabi'een, and this rule really benefited me, I learned this from my teacher, that he said that Imam Sufyan al-Thawri said, إذا رأيت الرجل يعمل العمل الذي قد اختلف فيه وأنت ترى غيره فلا تنكر عليه. That if you see someone doing something where there's difference of opinion, right? Some scholars said halal, some scholars said haram, right? If that's the case, don't forbid them from what they're doing. Don't tell them, brother, this is wrong, I have to stop you from doing this. Meaning, don't forbid them with your hand. If you see something bad, the hadith says, if you see something bad, change it with your hand. If you can, speak out with your tongue. If you can't, hate it in your heart at least. And that's the lowest of faith. So Imam Sufyan al-Thawri said, that's for the things that are clearly haram. Everybody agrees that it's haram. But if it's something where some scholars say this, even if the majority say this, and there are other scholars who say that, then this is not in that category of clearly haram. So you can have a discussion with someone, we have this TV show, let's try to avoid musical instruments if we can, so that way we're following the majority opinion. Let's only limit it to deaf. Okay. But if they say no because of X, Y, and Z, and because of the audience, and if we do that, we'll lose the viewers. Okay. There is an opinion there. You can follow it. It's not considered to be such a bad thing. So that's why it's important to know that. Even some of the great scholars of today, like Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayya, who is a very big scholar, from Mauritania in Saudi Arabia currently, he was giving advice to his students, and he was saying that especially in the West, and especially in places where music is very, very, prevalent, and people are coming to Islam, he said, don't force this opinion on them. That give them time, even if they're listening to music or they're involved in music, give them time. And then try to let them replace it with other good things. With Quran, with anashid, with dhikr, other good things. And so they will slowly but surely leave that other thing that is not very useful. So that's basically for the issue of music. And then inshallah, one of the things that I really love is I love when we have some engagement and discussion, inshallah. So hopefully we'll leave some time for the engagement and the discussion and the questions and the comments after the lecture and before the adhan, and also hopefully our sisters can also participate. So the next one is al-mizah, which is joking. And Imam al-Ghazali says that the general ruling for joking is that it's generally disliked or even not allowed except for in moderation. If it's in moderation, a small amount that's moderate is okay, but in general it's something to stay away from. And a person may say, as Imam Ghazali says, that what's wrong with joking? It makes people happy. And he said that know that the thing that is not allowed or the thing that is prohibited is joking too much or always joking, right? As for just a little bit, that's okay, because even the Prophet ﷺ himself, he used to joke with people, and the Prophet ﷺ said that I joke and I don't say anything except the truth. And what happened once upon a time when the Prophet ﷺ saw an old woman, and he told the woman that no old people will enter Jannah. And then she was really worried. No old people, and she was about to really get very disturbed. And then he ﷺ told her, Allah will make you young again and then put you in Jannah. And then she was very happy, right? So that's how the Prophet ﷺ, when he would joke, he used to laugh with his wives. He was described that كان أفكه الناس ضحكا بساما أو كما قال, that he was the most happy person when he was with his family. He was always smiling and laughing with us. So that's how he was, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But he would never lie. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam warned us about laughing too much. And he sallallahu alaihi wasallam told us that laughing too much deadens the heart, makes the heart dead. And so that's the danger. And the Prophet ﷺ, when he used to laugh and he would typically smile. He would smile. Sometimes, he would laugh until his, teeth would show. But typically he would smile. He wouldn't, crack up laughing very loudly and making sound and things like that. That wasn't his sunnah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he sallallahu alaihi wasallam told us that if you knew what I know, you would cry a lot and you would laugh little. So the thing that Imam Ghazali says that's not good, right, is just laughing so much, with loud sound, right? And what's good is smiling, as the Prophet ﷺ used to do, that showing the teeth but not hearing sound. That's how he used to laugh, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Yes. Now, also one of the other things about joking, which is interesting, the hadith narrated by Al-Izz ibn Abd al-Salam in his Qawa'id, that none of you should take the belongings of his brother in jest and seriously. And what's interesting about this is that sometimes we do things as a joke, and we think that because it's a joke, it's okay, right? The Prophet ﷺ told us also not to scare your brother, right? That as a joke, even as a joke, it's not okay, because that harms a fellow believer. Also, this is another thing. You shouldn't take the belongings of your brother in jest and seriousness. So sometimes, for example, in some cultures, maybe in a wedding or something, they might take the shoes of a person, right? And I just read this hadith today, and I linked it to that they'll take the shoes of the groom and then, and he has to find them and he gets angry. So this hadith is actually speaking to that kind of situation. You take something of someone, right? And then they're bothered that they can't get their thing and they're trying to get it and all of that. In general, it's not a good thing to do. There are always exceptions, but the general rule, as this hadith is saying, none of you should take the belongings of his brother in jest and seriously. Okay, so that's the section on joking. Then the next one he talks about is as-sukhriya wal-istihza, which is making fun of people. And this is haram. And mahma kana mu'dhiyan. It's haram if it is harmful to the other person. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا يسخر قوم من قوم عسى أن يكونوا خيرا منهم ولا نساء من نساء عسى أن يكن خيرا منهن. So, O you believe, a people should not make fun of another people. Maybe they are better than them. Maybe, i.e., maybe the one who is being made fun of is better than the one who is making fun of them. Neither should women make fun of other women. Maybe they are better than them. Maybe the ones who are being made fun of are better than the ones who are making fun of them. So here, when they talk about this concept of making fun of others, Imam Ghazali mentions that what's meant by that is to belittle them and to belittle them and to show their faults, right? And things that are bad about them in a way that makes other people laugh at them. And that's typically, you say, look at this person, look at his weird eyes, ha ha ha, look at this person, look how fat he is, ha ha ha, right? So that kind of thing is the meaning of sukhriya, which is the prohibited thing in the Quran. And he said it could also be by imitating a person and how they act or how they speak. And it could also be without words. It could just be by pointing or by gesturing. So all of that is making fun of people, and all of that is not allowed because it harms the other person. And there's a general rule in Islam that you cannot harm others. You cannot harm others. You cannot harm, especially Muslims, you cannot harm your Muslim brother by a word or by a phrase or by an action or by a movement or in any way, shape, or form. You cannot harm anyone, right? So that's the general rule. And then he talks about, but if someone has made himself the object of a joke, like a comedian or someone, he's doing that and you're laughing at it, or you're saying, look what this person's doing, and you're laughing, then that doesn't fall under this category because they are not bothered by that. They want people to laugh at them and what they're doing. So yes, and then when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the ayah says, عَسَىٰ أَن يَكُونُوا خَيْرًا مِّنْهُمْ, that they may be better than them, right? The people who are being made fun of may be better than the ones who are making fun, in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they could be better. So I think this is pretty straightforward about making fun of others. And the next one is ifsha as-sir, which is exposing secrets, or exposing trusts. And here, this is not allowed because it's harmful to others, and it is actually breaking the trust that has been given to you. And here we find that the Prophet ﷺ said, إِذَا حَدَّثَ الرَّجُلُ الْحَدِيثُ ثُمَّ الْتَفَتْ فَهِيَ أَمَانَةٌ. That if a person says something, if a man says something to another person, and then he looks around, then this is considered to be an amana, considered to be a trust. So I don't have to tell you, by the way, this is a secret, don't tell anyone. If I look around before telling you something, make sure no one's around, and then I tell you, then you automatically assume by this hadith that this is a secret and that you're not allowed to tell it to anyone else. Actually, it would be haram to tell it to anyone else, as Imam Ghazali mentions. And he says, because you are breaking the amana, you are breaking the trust. And when you break a trust and you tell it to someone else, then you are giving this amana to someone who is not worthy of the amana. And that's not allowed. So this is a very dangerous issue, very difficult issue. قال الحسن إن من الخيانة. Imam al-Hasan al-Basri said that it is considered khiyana, it's considered treachery to expose the secret of your brother. Now, of course, there are always special cases, special exceptions, but we're talking about the general rule is وهو حرام إذا كان فيه إضرار ولؤم إن لم يكن فيه إضرار. Imam Ghazali, because he's a faqih, he says that if it will lead to harming the other person, then it's haram. And if it will not lead to harming them, then it's bad character. Bad character, it's not haram, but it's bad character, it's lu'm. And lu'm is also a very strong word for bad character. Al-la'im, no one would want to be described as la'im, or, I don't know how to translate it in English, but it's, bad character. Yeah. And interestingly, Ibn Zuhri says that it's mentioned in the Ihya that you can even lie to protect that person's secret. So if someone comes and tells you, to expose, what did that person tell you? And, maybe they told you something, someone told you something in confidence that if you expose it, it would actually harm them, right? Then in this case, if there's no way that you can protect it except by lying, you're allowed to lie, even in that case. Because you're allowed to lie, and maybe we might be able to touch on it as a last point, but you're allowed to lie to protect your own honor. You're not, in Islam, you're not supposed to expose your faults to others. And if the only way that you can protect your honor is by lying, you're allowed to lie. So similarly, to protect the honor of your brother, you're also allowed to lie if there's no other way that you can do it. So that's exposing secrets. The next one is promise is giving a false promise, or lying, or giving a promise that you intend not to fulfill. And Imam Ghazali mentions that typically people's tongues are quick to promise, and then the nafs may not fulfill it, and so a person will end up breaking the promise, and this is one of the signs of hypocrisy. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu awfu bil uqud. O you who believe, fulfill your covenants. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described Nabi Ismail alayhi salam, he said, إِنَّهُ كَانَ صَادِقَ الْوَعْدِ, that he was truthful whenever he would promise. So if, Imam Ghazali mentions that if you promise and it's very clear that you intend to do it, then you have to do it, unless there's some excuse. And by breaking that promise, it's considered a sign of hypocrisy. As the Prophet ﷺ mentioned in the hadith, أربع من كن فيه كان منافقا ومن كان فيه خلة منها كان فيه خلة من النفاق حتى يدعوها إذا حدث كذب وإذا وعد أخلف وإذا عاهد غدر وإذا خاصم فجر. That there are four characteristics. If a person has them, he will be a hypocrite. And if he has any of these characteristics, he will have a characteristic of hypocrisy until he leaves it. If the person speaks, he lies, and if he promises, he breaks it. And if he ahad ghadar, and if he is given a trust, he breaks that trust. And if he has a debate or a fight with or a disagreement with someone, he will explode, or he will act in a wicked way. So these are signs of hypocrisy. And Imam Ghazali mentioned that this is particularly when you're making the promise, you intend not to do it. Not necessarily if something happens and you're not able to do it. But he said that even if something happens and you're not able to do it, he said here, فَأَمَّا مَنْ عَزَمَ عَلَى الْوَفَاءِ فَعَنَّ لَهُ عَمْ. So he says that. So he's saying that if you make the promise and you intend to do it, but then something happens and you can't do it, or it's very difficult to do, you won't necessarily be committing a sin not to fulfill the promise, but you will be doing something that still looks like the characteristic of the munafiq. And so he said, and it's important to avoid even that. You don't even want to look like anything that resembles the munafiq, even to the extent that when you, Ibn Mas'ud, whenever, even to the extent of coming on time. If you tell someone you're going to meet them at a particular time, that's a promise, and then to come late, it's not good character, because you're not fulfilling that promise. May Allah help all of us to come on time, whenever we say we're going to come. And so Ibrahim al-Nakhai, when he was asked that, if a person promises, to meet you at a certain time, what should you do when they're late? And he said, wait until the next salah time. So imagine someone said, I'll meet you at 12 o'clock, I'll meet you at, 2 o'clock after dhuhr, and they don't come. He's saying, of course, they didn't have mobile phones and all of these kinds of things, right? But he's saying, wait until the next salah time. So you give them that all this time. Why? Because the assumption, how I read it, is that the assumption of a believer is that he's going to fulfill his promise. Someone promised you he's going to come, you assume that he's going to come, and you give him that time. So I think we will, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, we'll stop there, and maybe we have about 5 minutes. If we have any questions or comments, inshallah, we would love to hear from you. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi sahbihi ajma'in. Also, if the sisters have any questions or comments, yes, please, brother. Oh, alhamdulillah. So our brother is saying that, are there fabricated ahadith in Imam Ghazali's Ihya al-Muddin? There is probably nothing that is written by a human being, except that it will have some mistakes or some faults. Typically, as far as ahadith, I'm not aware if there's anything fabricated, completely fabricated in there. Because as far as hadith science, the hadith are different levels. And when you look at a hadith, there are two ways you judge a hadith. One is by the chain of narration, the different people who have narrated it. And the second is by the meaning of the hadith. So if the meaning of the hadith has something that is haram, or that is wrong, or that is contradicting something else that is stronger, typically that will make it weak. If there is somebody in the chain who is not, doesn't have a good memory, or who has his character is not excellent, that will also make it weak. So you could have so the hadith is a combination of those two. Now, why do I say that? Is that typically the people have mentioned about a hadith in Imam Ghazali's book, they don't criticize for the fabricated hadith, because fabricated hadith typically means it has no basis whatsoever, right? But sometimes there are what they call weak hadith. Weak hadith means that the meaning is okay, but there is somebody in the chain, maybe there's 20 people in the chain, this one heard from that one, heard from that one, heard from that one, and one of them has a bad memory. Or one of them typically has to do with memory, or maybe one of them, his character wasn't good. Or maybe there is somebody there who scholars say, we don't know who this person is. So that would automatically make the hadith considered weak. Or it could even make the hadith considered fabricated. It could be. So hadith scholars always err on the side of caution, because they don't want people to follow something in the name that this is the Prophet ﷺ said this, and he didn't say it. So in issues of spirituality and fada'il al-a'mal and virtues of good deeds, typically you find that scholars use some hadith that are not fabricated but maybe are weak, if those hadith are supported by other ahadith that are stronger. So that's a long answer. I'm not aware that there's fabricated ahadith that have no basis, but definitely there may be ahadith that are weak, and scholars have looked at the hadith in Imam Ghazali's book and categorized each one as what its strength is. And so if you are teaching it, it's important not to narrate a hadith that is fabricated or that's weak unless it has some support from another source.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Your words that you mentioned about there's very strict values that need to be adhered when it comes to public speaking. It's very alarming because in all the debates I've observed, most of these debates have deviated from the norms that we have established. But the point is, who is to police this? Because in a lot of these debates went beyond the parameters that you mentioned just now. Most of them are haram. You know, you disturb people's feelings, you argue with a loud mouth. All this are happening in parliaments and all over the place. So who's to safeguard for this to be restricted in terms of happenings?
MashaAllah, alhamdulillah. So I would say there's two approaches. The primary approach, as far who is to safeguard when someone is violating these rules that have to do with speaking, right? The primary safeguard is always the person's own fear of Allah. That's typically the primary safeguard in Islam. It's a bottom-up approach that, alhamdulillah, we have gatherings like this. We make a culture of learning that we teach this to our children, and so on and so forth, right? And then we enjoin the good and we forbid the evil. If there is also a role, now there are certain things where it harms others, you know, like accusing someone of something where it can go to court. If the harmed party brings the thing to court in an Islamic environment, then they can go to court. And I know here in Malaysia that there are certain things like certain crimes that are part of the jurisdiction of the Sharia courts that you can go to. So that's another thing, which is if someone is harmed, they can go to the court and it's taken care of that way. There is another role that the scholars talk about, which is al-muhtasib, which is that for the Islamic ruler to put someone in different positions where they command the good and forbid the evil. And they, for example, they go to the market, they make sure that everything's being done fair, no one's doing anything that it's wrong. And here, there's rules for enjoining the good and forbidding the evil. And typically the rule is that it should be something that is clear, agreed upon, so there's no difference of opinion, right? And is done openly, so you don't need to spy in order to discover the thing. So if someone is doing something, you know, for example, Ibn Taymiyyah talks about if someone's giving a fatwa, right? And they're giving a fatwa that is wrong, or they're doing it in a way that they're not qualified to do, then the ruler should have a muhtasib who will go and regulate that and stop that practice from happening. But the key here is that for the ruler to get involved, typically it should be something that is clear-cut, no difference of opinion, being done openly. Then they can enjoin the good and forbid the evil if they think that this will not lead to a bigger harm. We have a rule that you enjoin the good and forbid the evil as long as you don't think it will lead to a bigger harm or create a bigger evil, right? And you believe that it will have a positive effect, then you do that. So to summarize, first it's the bottom up, it's their own person's own heart and their own fear of Allah. And then second, if a person harms another one, then they can go to a court and bring that issue up. And third is the institution of hisbah, where the ruler will set up a proactive institution to enjoin the good and forbid the evil. But that's typically for things that are clear-cut with no difference of opinion and that are done openly and where you believe it's going to have a bigger benefit. And Allah knows best. I hope that answers the question. Maybe we can take one or two more questions if anyone has. Or if our sisters have any questions. Huh? No? No questions? Alhamdulillah. Everybody asleep? Okay. Alhamdulillah. Barakallahu feekum. So we will end with a dua. اللهم لك الحمد يا رب كما ينبغي لجلال وجهك وعظيم سلطانك. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم اجعل تجمعنا هذا تجمعا مرحوما وتفرقنا من بعده تفرقا معصوما ولا تجعل فينا ولا بيننا شقيا ولا محروما. اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. اللهم اهدنا لأحسن الأخلاق لا يهدي لأحسنها إلا أنت وجنب عنا سيئها لا يجنب عنا سيئها إلا أنت. اللهم آت نفوسنا تقواها وزكها أنت خير من زكاها أنت وليها ومولاها. اللهم ألهمنا رشدنا وأعذنا من شرور أنفسنا ووفقنا جميعا لما تحبه وترضاه. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless us with the best in this world and the next. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide us to the best character. He is the only one who can guide us to the good character, and we ask Allah to protect us from bad character. He is the only one who can protect us from bad character. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to purify our hearts and to give us taqwa. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless us to see Ramadan and to bless this month and to bless us to see Ramadan in the best way. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless our nation and to bless our leadership and to guide everyone to the best in this world and the next. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.